it's like, no, we've got to do more. We've got to work harder. We've got to produce more because then we can make more money and all that kind of thing. And it's destructive. We're not moving forward. It's actually, you're going to kill yourself in it.
Jamie, as always, welcome back. You're one of my favorite people, and it's just a thrill to see you again and catch up.
Yeah, thank you. Happy New Year. And it sounds like you got a lot of great stuff going on, and
yeah,
I'm super proud of you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah,
thank you.
So it's good to be with you.
It's so kind of you to say that because you've known me now for almost 8 years, and what I'm thankful for is not only what we're going to talk about today, formation and transformation, but it really is. It's the power of the Holy Spirit to transform my life, and I think that's why I'm so grateful for the conversations you and I have had and continue to have here on this platform, because I want to bake fresh bread and give people something of nourishment, and I know that's your heart and Donna's heart, and so
absolutely.
Jamie, as we've been talking about before we hit record here today, we are in this series called Formed. I told the folks here on the podcast, Jamie, I've never done a series, but I just felt led of the Lord to do it. So here we are. Richard Foster was on, Ruth Haley Barton was last week, and here you are today. And so I think let's just start here. You teased some really important things to me early on, and so I'll just start here.
Okay.
Jamie, when we talk about, when you hear spiritual formation, what lights up in your mind and in your heart as important? You can take this wherever you'd like.
Yeah, I think the formation it's interesting because I'm thinking a lot lately about the word transform, right? Transformation. So it's like changing the form of something. So when you think about, well, how do you, if you're going to transform, what's your process of formation of anything? Like how do you, and not just how do you form something, but spiritually, what's the formation process? So every time we do something, there's a process involved. So if we're looking for spiritual transformation, which is really, as you and I were talking, the only thing that really works is spiritual transformation. All other sorts of transformation are limited, or, like New Year's resolutions, and I'm going to change this and I'm going to change that. But until there's a real mind change, a real truth telling, can you really get into the actual spiritual transformation? So you need that spiritual transformation, which requires some practice of spiritual formation. So one of the things that we're working on for 2023 is the idea, and this kind of came from being in the public schools. We do a lot of work in the public schools, and I was talking with principals right before the end of the year, and I was saying to them, in a situation in life where you're going along and you're moving along, and you run into an obstacle or a barrier that produces some kind of suffering, this is a wake-up call, right? This is a wake-up call, and you have an opportunity to seek out transformation by hitting a barrier or suffering or struggle, and it's the value of all of that thing. So a successful response to that would be, or a fruitful response, is to stop. Don't keep running into the barrier in conflict, and banging your head against it, and you're getting all into the negative and false identity and all that stuff. But to stop, to calm down, rest. I love it when Elijah, after the big Mount Carmel thing, and he's frustrated and scared because Jezebel wasn't intimidated by the whole thing, right? She's still just threatened him, and he gets depressed and he's angry and fearful, and the response of the angel is, you need to lay down and take a nap. Like you need to stop and calm down, because the next part of this is not your responsibility. You're not involved in it. It's like there's other people. You're not the only one. That's what happens when you get into the banging against something. I'm the only one. It's not going to work. And he says to God, just kill me now. Just kill me. And the response of the angel is like, you need to lay down. You need to take a nap, and I'll feed you. Right? Which is a kind of spiritual discipline. It's like rest, Sabbath, It's like now feed from God, which is listening and prayer. And so when you run into a barrier, the process is just stop and move into spiritual discipline, contemplation, spiritual formation. Move into it. Fast, pray, silence, like these beautiful, and then in the contemplation comes innovation. Like that's where innovation is in the spiritual formation. It's like so gorgeous. It's like abide in me, contemplation, the spiritual disciplines, and you will bear fruit, right? And the innovation will come. I think you're a great example of this. How did that come? It came from you hitting barriers and stopping, which is a discipline. Like stop, rest, stop. And then back up and then pray and listen and meditate and truth tell, confess and experience mind change. That's the contemplative spiritual disciplines all together. And what comes out of it is creation, creativity, fruit. And just in your own story is like, and look what comes out of it. It's incredible. And it's beautiful, and we're energized by it. And then what happens is not like God goes, beautiful, well done, we're done. It's like, we're going to do that again, but at a higher level. And what people forget is you're not done. We're talking about you're a masterpiece. You're going to move beyond what you can ask or imagine. So at each kind of level, what's the process? You hit an obstacle, you hit a barrier, you hit a challenge, whatever you want to call it. You're suffering, you're struggling, and it challenges us to go into creativity. So it's never a problem, it's a challenge, right? So Moses comes, got out of Egypt. Way to go. Beautiful. Fantastic. It was quite the process, all of that. And now you're trapped, right, at the Red Sea. So here we go. Another barrier, another obstacle. What do? You stop, and you back up and you contemplate. And it's even like, okay, wait, why are we doing this in the first place? Okay, we're on track. This is we're going in the right direction. Let's practice the disciplines. And then you innovate. Then comes the innovation because God wants to do things in new ways, to keep showing you, wowing us, showing us he's with us, showing us never to be afraid, never to believe the lies. But it keeps coming at higher and higher levels or more and more challenging so that we continue to grow. Otherwise, we'll just sit back, right? And when we sit back is when we start to atrophy, and we'll go back into the false, right? Yeah, just as we were talking earlier about Israel,
yeah, right.
Like they got out and they made it all the way out to here, and then and they hit a barrier, and instead of practicing what they've learned along the way, they go all the way back to, hey, our identity is we're grasshoppers and we're nothing, and when they're at the next highest level of let's go forward with God, he keeps moving us up. I love that. I love that he's doing that. And so we're constantly submitting ourselves as holy sacrifice, holy and acceptable, and not conforming to the patterns of the world, but being transformed. It's this constant movement. So when someone like you says, like, this beautiful thing has come out of me that I've co-created it with God, I'm like, that is great, because whatever's next is more than that. Like, that's so thrilling. And yet at the same time, we know the disciplines that are going to be involved in it. It's not easy. It's not like, just name it and claim it kind of things. It's disciplines involved. So I'm in the middle of that right now myself. So.
Okay. Well, yeah, before I move on then, just talk to me. To the extent you're comfortable, tell me about that. If you're in the middle of that, what's happening?
Well, in 2022, we saw, me and Donna and people I work with, we saw, God open up certain things that were just amazing to us. And all of it is the result of prayer, fasting, silence, contemplation, and then creative ideas and then hearing and responding to God, which is obedience, obeying the invitation of God, and always asking God, are you inviting us into this? Are we doing this for our own ego? That kind of discipline. And it's been amazing. But then as God, he raises the bar. I love it. I love how he does this to the disciples. He's always doing it to them. Because he's teaching them to be fearless, right? He's creating them to be not afraid of anything, even unto death, even torture and all that. No, they're not afraid of anything. But so it's a process that you go through. So for me, I'm really wrestling with what can we do about evil itself, right? So we're involved in we're working on this countering anti-human trafficking project, where we're actually going after the traffickers themselves. It's been quite a challenge, and oh my gosh, and questions like, we don't even love the traffickers, we don't even love those people. Well, why don't we're supposed to love everyone? And then into this deep contemplation on, are there some people we don't love, right? Anyway, all that, and so, but then when we get into it, it's but what can we do? That's okay. We're doing that, but what do we do against evil itself? How do we? Because the whole world seems, messed up, and so it felt like let's write something. Let's write something, a screenplay, where people can watch and engage with the journey into identity and evil itself. How would we do a screenplay of that kids that are alone at home could watch and go, oh my gosh, that's me, and there's a process. How do we do that? So we started to write that and work on it. And the amount of work involved, and when people read it and said, yeah, this is something we need, we want to do it, it became so much work, and all that's involved in it. Really, what I felt like doing was this is just too much. It's too much. We can't. And then when we got into dealing with the formula for how do you present a screenplay, and how do you produce it, and Hollywood and lawyers and the whole nightmare, how do we keep the story pure, because it is pure, from being polluted by the process of how you market something. And once money gets involved and other opinions and investment, and so all of it is so overwhelming. My sense is it's not work. It's just too much. It's just too much work and effort, and it's just too overwhelming. And so then but when I stop and I get with the Lord and fasted and prayed about it, it was sold. They bought it. It got bought, which was great. But then that's when it got really complicated, because now you have directors, and if I can just share this with you. So just for any aspiring artists and creatives out there, it's so worth going through all of this, but you really have to die on the way. It's so important that you have to, it's a death. Yeah, you know this. It's a death along the way, and your ego has to get out of the way. But so in the contract negotiations for this project, the production company, they asked me, they read the script, they liked it, they brought in some directors, they read it. It's all about identity and evil, and what's false identity and what's real evil in a real world, in a real situation, from my police background. It's a real case. So I'm not making up anything in this whole thing. It's very moving. But, and so they do you have a non-negotiable? What's your non-negotiable in this contract? And I said, my non-negotiable is that everyone who's involved in it, every single human being that's involved, needs to go through the identity process themselves. Everyone, the janitor, the lighting guy. Now, the beautiful thing about the production company, is the guys, the owners of the production company, have been through this process themselves. And so when they read this is the difference between a kingdom company. There's three. There's a kingdom company. There might be a Christian company, which are very different. And then there's just, a company that's making as much money as they can. But a kingdom company is interested in spiritual formation. That's what they're interested in. Are we putting out something that takes a broken human being and gives them a process to get well? Like, right? So anyway, so this is a risk to them because they don't work with all believers and all that stuff. And but they agreed, and we wrote it into the contract. So as an aspiring, screenplay writer, that kind of thing, will shut your whole thing down. If that's your non-negotiable, that could just end the whole thing. But they agreed, and they're amazing. And I was talking with them last night, and it's just, so just quickly. So we went in. I went into the studios there, me and my co-writer, and on the first kind of go round with the three directors that were involved, they read the script, and they're professionals and they know what they're doing, and they're like dividing it up and saying, take this part out, we'll show this, and don't say it, and all that. Really good, really amazing guys. But what was fascinating was watching how they read it, and then later that day, 15 crew members and them came into a room, and we walked through the identity process all together with the owners of the company, who were super brave to do this, because there's lots of things can happen because people in the room weren't believers. And so our whole thing is, if we're going to write a story about transformation, it should be working with people that are working on the story, right? Because you can't give away what you don't have. It's not like we're just writing out of our head and create. It's like, no, people involved are being transformed. So we did it, and it was people were weeping. And then when they came back and read the script, they were like, oh my gosh, now we understand what's happening here. And it affected how they brought their own identities, which they didn't know before, into the creation of this project. Right? And so to do that is like incredibly intimidating for me, because these guys know their industry and I don't. And so to get in a room with these professionals, directors, and they've worked on tons of big projects and all that, and say, hey, here's something, I want to introduce this process that you may not know. And some of them were hesitant to do it, but they did it. And then watch the Spirit of God move in a room like that. And right? It's just astounding. And so then it enables these creatives to create at a level they didn't know before. And it's astounding. And so, but at the same time, it's super intimidating because what if it doesn't work? What if they think you're a nutcase? All of those things. And so I have to keep going back to the Lord and saying, what do I really believe about you, God? Can you move in this room? Like, I know I've seen you move in many different rooms with lots of different people, but not, what about this room? And is this going to ruin the project? And are they going to think I'm a crazy man? And all that fear comes up, and the enemy is so good at that fear. And so then you've got to go back to the basics of your spiritual formation, and you've got to shut out all the noise and calm it all down and just say, Lord, what's true about me? What's true about you? It's like back to the basics, but you're faster to go through them, right? Because you've been doing it. Like, you're quicker, but you still have to have that spiritual formation disciplines in line and in place, so you can keep falling back into them and coming forward the next day. So can I say one more thing about that?
Of course.
Yeah. So coming in, with all of that, then also because you're working on this project, it's very consuming. It means other things have to be set aside, which is also hard if you get your identity from all the stuff you're involved in or your approval from other people. So when I have to go and say, hey, we're going to drop this, we're not going to be involved in this because I feel like the Lord's inviting me into this pretty fully. That was hard, and that was fear-producing in me, because I don't want to disappoint people, and I don't want to let people down. All of these crazy ways the enemy works just to get us off focus. And so I was praying at the end. I was in the Dubai in the desert, and just to encourage, and strangely, weirdly, in the desert, a storm front came through and it rained for like 4 days straight in the desert in Dubai. And so I was sitting there watching the rain pour in the desert. And I was asking the Lord, I've been praying and asking the Lord, like, tell me how to think about this project in 2023. And I was watching the rain pour in the desert, and he said to me, I want you to understand that where you're going into is going to look like a desert to you. Like it can't be done, like it's not going to grow, it's not going to work, there's not enough resource. It's going to look like a desert. But I'm showing you right now, actually showing you, I can pour rain in a desert. And people are going, wow, how is this happening? Like, and he said, so I want you to remember that I make the desert bloom. I'm not, God's known for making the desert bloom. Every desert, any desert, if you're walking with him, if he's leading the way. So that was right at the end. And so I was praying about strategically. Okay, great, beautiful. Okay, so strategically, how does that work out on January 1st and 2nd and 3rd with this project? And he said to me, okay, I want you to call these two people and invite them into the project. I'm like, okay, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that when I get back, and I'm going to fly to LA, and I'm going to invite these people into the project. So yes, okay, that's obedience, to hear and respond. I'm obeying to that. So that was a big one. And then I want you to ask me every day to give this to you. I want you to ask me every day to give it to you. What can I do for you? I'm asking you, and you know this question, Chris, really well. It's the Lord looking at you going, what do you want? What do you want me to do for you? And that's, and like the blind man said, I want to see. I want to be able to see. And then Jesus says, may it be as you have asked. May it be as you have believed, right? So interesting in Luke, when Zechariah is meeting Gabriel and they're telling about the birth of John the Baptist, and, Gabriel questions it and then he can't talk. And I love the line there. The idea is unbelief is not allowed to speak here. Because Zacharias was responding in unbelief, and Gabriel's like, unbelief is not allowed to speak here. If what's going to come out of your mouth is unbelief, you're not saying it. You don't talk. When you do talk, to speak with belief. And that's what locked and unlocked his voice, his own voice. I love that. And so the Lord was like, ask me and speak out of belief when you talk about this to me or to other people. So I came back, we flew back in the U.S., and we got back in December 30th that night. That night, the two people whose names I wrote down, I'm going to invite them into this, I'm going to fly out to L.A., contact me, and they go, hey, Jamie, we haven't talked in a while, but the both of us are writing books, and we were just praying about how to proceed with that, and we thought we need to take a writing sabbatical, and we decided to do it in Tennessee, which is where we are. And they said, and we realized, hey, you're in Tennessee, aren't you? Would you mind if we came and just spent a couple of nights with you? These are the two people I wrote down to invite. And on January 1st, both of the people are sitting in our living room at our house in Little East Tennessee, and I'm inviting them into this project. And they're so excited about it, they don't know what to do. And so every day, January 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, into today, has been people contacting me saying, we want to be in this project. Here's how we want to contribute to this project, including the great guys at the studio who texted me yesterday and said, all of us are praying for you all of a sudden. It's 11:38. We're all praying for you. Here's what the God is showing us about this project. And it's just God saying, ask me, ask me, ask me. And so the level has gone way up in terms of things I'm involved in. But the disciplines and the formation of just listening, quiet, contemplation, then the innovation, ideas come, and then the obedience is act on them. And as soon as actually the Lord is actually, then he gets ahead of me. And it's like Joshua when he's looking at the walled city of Jericho, and in his mind he sees it as ready for war. And the angel of the Lord says, look, I've delivered them into your hands. They're both looking at the exact same facts. And he sees, oh boy, here we go. And the angel of the Lord is like, it's already done. So I'm excited about it. It's thrilling, but as all the great people say, faith is spelled R-I-S-K. That's what it is. It's not just God's going to hand it to you and it's all going to be his favor and grace. It's like he's inviting us into something where I labor according to his power, which mightily works in me, right? It's I labor, we do labor. He's inviting us into the work according to his power, which mightily works in us. And to me, that's the formation and the disciplines is what you have to feel. Otherwise, I don't think you'll do it.
Right. You, like you always do, have just painted through this story of the screenplay and the filmmakers. It's a case study for us.
Right.
And I'm taking notes, like, folks, if you're watching on YouTube right now, like, it's just, I'm going nuts here because, Jamie, I think what I want to do is we kind of move this conversation forward. I want to tell you sort of what I heard you say, and then maybe we could sort of just tackle each part. So the first thing I heard you say is this, and the picture I saw when you were talking was like an infinity loop, and here's the statement I heard. Formation is for transformation, and transformation is for formation, because formation is for transformation, because transformation is for formation. What's the point of that? We're formed through these disciplines, through the power of the Holy Spirit. We're formed to be transformed, and when we are transformed, formation helps us utilize strategies for formation to help be agents of transformation for others. And this is all about multiplication. Okay, so that's the first thing I heard you say. And then we can drill down. The second thing I heard you say is this. Two important questions that we have to be able to negotiate with in this process of formation. It's like Colossians 1:21, actually. Number one, what do we believe about God? Do we fully believe he is who he says he is? Number two, what do we believe about ourselves?
Yes.
Our lives hidden in Christ, like Colossians 3 says. Mm-hmm. The third thing I heard you say, and then we'll go back and drill down here. Formation is a filter. It allows you to say, yes, this is important for this season. The discipline enables you to filter out superfluous stuff in your life.
Right, exactly.
And then the fourth was simply this case study. You were just mentioning Elijah and Jericho and the whole thing, but I find it fascinating because you also talked about the blind man that Jesus healed. Mm-hmm. Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, lived in Jericho, the city where the walls came down. And so Jesus comes to all of us in our true identities and says, what do you want me to do for you? Now, what's fascinating in Mark's account of that, before Bartimaeus got up and went to Jesus to hear that question, he had to hear these three things. Take courage, get up, he's calling you.
Good.
So let's just kind of ping back through that. I wanted to kind of throw all that at you, but let's just go backwards and start with this infinity loop. And tell me what you think is important for us to know about this. Again, I'll state it. Formation is for transformation, and transformation is for formation.
Yeah, I think that's great. I like
what do we need to know? Anything more?
Well, I mean, I think I say to people all the time, and I think the highest level of who I am in Christ and the truth of who I am is to be a co-creator with God. I mean, that's when humans are operating at their highest healthy whole level, they're creators. And so the ability to form and create things is evidence to me of you're walking in the truth of who you are, right? You're bearing fruit. And so, it is that beautiful passage, that beautiful infinity loop. I like the way you say that we should be, our transformation should be leading to the formation of things, which then pushes us back into transformation and others into transformation. So like when I'm doing that with the creative team, it's interesting because when they went through that process and some of them weren't believers, they had, as soon as they engage in the truth of who they are, they started having creative insights and ideas. They engaged in a kind of formation, which then makes them want to pursue, how do I cultivate these ideas? What's involved? What did we just do? We listened. We rested in God, that. And so, I like that. I like being in a community of people who are constantly formation, transformation, creativity mode. It's really beautiful.
Well, what you just said moments ago, folks, I hope you don't move past what Jamie said. Jamie, it was so subtle, but this leapt out at me. We can't use this conversation around formation and theological discipline. It's not life hacks, and it's not a hobby. This is for action.
No.
This is for this is for creating. This is for Ephesians 2:10. We are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do the works that he called us and formed us to do. And so there it is again, the word formation. Yep. Formation is for the transformation of nations, of people groups, of ourselves. So then let's just move from that then. Jamie, the second thing I sort of extrapolated is there are two questions that really affect this process of formation, our ability to engage with disciplines. Number one, what do we believe about God? What do we believe about ourselves? Mm-hmm. What else do we need to know about those two questions, and how do we get honest with those two questions so then we're not just giving the syrupy Christianese answers and
the formulaic
ourselves.
Right. Yeah, the formulaic, and we're not even telling the truth when we, that's the thing we're being deceptive, self-deceptive, and we don't realize it. So yeah, again, being informs doing. So we can watch, and Jesus said the same thing: by their fruit you know them, right? Out of the overflow of the heart the mouth speaks. And so when you're watching people do things, or in yourself, is what is it that you actually believe? Because what we see demonstrated is that you don't believe God can do this, and you don't believe that you're capable of doing it. So anytime I'm doing anything where I feel fearful or intimidated, I know I've got to go back to, well, what does this say I believe about God? Ultimately, that's always what it gets to is, well, what does this say you believe about God? And then the question there is like looking at the desert and watching the rain come. Do you believe God is for you? Like, do you believe that? Because I'm telling you, most of us don't believe that. And I definitely wasn't raised. And I just did a session with a team earlier today, and one of the guys on the team was very much of the idea. He was wrestling with it that God is somehow not for us, right? He's not. He's kind of up there judging us and that. And so if God is not for you, then that means you have to self-protect against God. You have to protect yourself against God. So how well can you go to God and say, speak to me? You won't. You won't do it. You may say those words, but because deep down, unless I'm convinced that God is for me and Jesus is with me and the Spirit is in me, I would never open myself up to ask like that. So again, we're all the way back to, you run into a barrier, you back up, and you move into contemplation, and it's like God's inviting us into something that, I forget, I think Richard Rohr wrote this, talking about when God invites you into, people in Scripture, into something and explains to them what's going to happen, they're more perplexed by the explanation that God is giving than before they ask the question. And so it's not like God's explanation just goes, oh yeah, I get that. Okay, I see that. It's like, oh my gosh, that explanation makes it even more confounding. You're gonna march around and blow trumpets and the walls will come down. It's like, really? Wow, that's an interesting strategy. So it keeps going back to, really, what do I believe about God? And then what do I believe about myself? Yeah, for sure. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. So unless we're back in those questions all the time, and this is what we were all the way talking about, like God raising the bar. It's like, yeah, God's great. God can, again, back to Elijah too. God can feed me with ravens and I can lay by a brook and drink. Great, beautiful. But then the brook dries up. And then the question is, yeah, but can God now take what you learned about being fed by ravens, and can you take that to another person, and you're telling that story to another person who will trust you that God will take care of them? And do you believe that God will take care of them too? Mm-hmm. You know He'll take care of you, but do you have can you know that God will transform you. Can you write a script that you think it'll transform other people? Like, so then you're back to like, wow, God, could you really do that? Like, can you really do that? And would you do that with me? And am I worth that? And so you do keep coming back to those two questions all the time, but at higher and higher levels, at deeper. I know it's where the risk factor seems higher. It's not, but it appears like, well, there's more at stake in this one. There's not, but in our minds, that's how it seems. And God's just like showing us, I'm more than you can ask or imagine. You're more than you can ask or imagine. The whole thing is more than you can ask or imagine. Like the whole thing is that. It's the whole journey is learning that. And how do you learn it? By struggle, by going into situations where it looks like it's impossible and it doesn't work and it looks like you fail, but can you really fail? So it's back to formation and transformation and formation and transformation. But that's mine. I mean, I ask God all the time, what am I afraid of in this? Why am I afraid to go in and talk to these? And then it comes down to what? Do you think I'm not going to go with you in this? Do you think I can talk to Muslims, but I can't talk to film producers? Like it's constantly learning about the nature of God.
This is huge. You asked a question I doubt many of us ask the Lord. And the question you ask the Lord is, Lord, what am I afraid of? You'd think intuitively we'd all go, oh, I know what I'm afraid of. But you ask the Lord, what am I afraid of? Because he knows the issue behind the issue. Talk about that a little more. Because for a lot of people joined with us today, Jamie, this process of asking the Lord questions might be new, but to ask that type of really nuanced question provides an explosion of transformation when we ask that type of question. And I'll set it up this way, and then I'll let you go. We don't ask the Lord questions because he doesn't know the answers. In other words, another way to say it is like God doesn't ask us questions because he doesn't know the answers. That's a better way of saying it.
Right.
There's something rhetorical. There's a point he's trying to make. So let's go back to the question you asked the Lord. Lord, what am I afraid of?
Right.
Boom. Unpack that.
Yeah, I mean that, and because it's a lie, right? The thing that the fear is pointing to in your life is something that you believe about God, yourself, or the world that's not true. And the challenge is I don't know what that is necessarily. I don't know what I believe falsely about. I'm deceived by it.
Yes, that's it. Okay, and that's what I was getting after because, let's say a skeptic is pushing back on both of us to say right now, well, wouldn't you know what you're afraid of? Why would you ask? Why wouldn't you know? And I think what you just said is, we don't know because fear, shame, guilt, false identities puts a lens through which we look. So we don't even know what to ask. We don't know what we're seeing. Is that what I heard you say? Right.
Yeah, it's like when we're reading the story of Gideon and you ask even when we read that story and you ask the Israelites, who's the enemy here? And they would say the Midianites. And it's like, it is not the Midianites.
Right.
Yeah. The Midianites are taking advantage of a situation, but they're not the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem, the prophet says it is your fear. That's what he says. Your fear of the other gods.
Yeah,
that's what's making you vulnerable. Not your. We can kill the Midianites, and so I just remember I was doing a thing in California, and I was driving back to the airport, and I was just walking through the Beatitudes, like one of my disciplines, and I was just blessed are the poor in spirit. And I was asking the Lord, is there anything in my life that prevents me from receiving all that you have for me? I want to be empty of everything that prevents me from receiving from you. And the Lord just in my mind said, you're afraid of, you're afraid of resource or something like that. And it just was a thought that came to my mind. And I'm like, what does that mean? That's exactly how he works. It's like, what does that mean? I'm afraid of a resource. And the Lord was like, I'm inviting you into some things that you deep down are afraid are going to make you go broke because there doesn't seem to be any resource that comes out of it, or recompense or something. And that was like such a, like, I wasn't going to tell God that one. I wasn't going to I'll just, I'm just going to put that one way over there. I don't want to dwell on it. But the Lord does want to talk about it, because he's a lie that'll hurt, that'll make me slow down and shut down in things he's inviting me into. And so then I asked, like, what does that mean? And then he says, and then it's back to my view of God. You think that if you go into this, I won't meet your needs, that I won't do it, because the thing is not going to do it. You can't see how the project's not going to do it. So if the project's not going to do it, then it's not going to happen. That's what you believe. And that's going to hurt you, because you're going to not go into this project. Right. And so it was so deep and beautiful. And what's most beautiful to me is the Lord wanted to take away that lie. Like, he wanted to go to that. So he was asking me, those questions, and then it comes again down to, like, well, why would you do that for me? Because you're worthy, because I love you. That's why. And then the perfect love casts out the fear. The perfect love moves you out of the fear. But again, these are practices and disciplines that you work on all the time. You don't just do it when you're in the crunch. It's like every day you're asking the Lord, like, is there anything in me that's preventing me from receiving all that you have for me? And that's just a regular discipline question, and part of just my spiritual practice. But why does it move you forward? It really helps you live in truth. Right.
How often do you ask the Lord that very question? Lord, is there anything that's keeping me from receiving from you?
Anytime I feel anxious about something or hesitant to do something, it's like anytime there's a pushback on something, I ask the Lord, is there anything in me that's preventing me from receiving everything you have for me? And just so that I'm aware of, is the pushback may be the Holy Spirit saying, I don't want you involved in this. But I want to make sure that it's that and not me being afraid or something like that. One of the questions I pray quite a bit, and I pray this a lot with other people, is, Lord, what are the things I'm doing for you that you never asked me to do? Right? I love that question, because it really rocks people. It really helps purify what you're involved in. And the only time I ask people to pray that is when what they're doing for the Lord is producing in them despair or shame or something. And they'll be telling me, we're doing this for God, and and I could give you a bunch of examples. I won't, and I'm just saying, okay, it's interesting because the fruit of God inviting us into something, even suffering, is joy. And when I hear you talking, I don't hear that joy. I hear despair and fear and shame and guilt. And so let's ask God, did you invite me into this? Or did I invite myself into this? Or did I do this because I feel bad about something? Like that kind of thing. And that really helped. That's another question, like, Lord, is there anything in my life that's preventing me from receiving all that you have for me? Lord, am I involved in anything that I'm doing for you that you actually didn't invite me into? I've watched people break down in tears on that question. Because even when I say it, they're like, they already know that, I'm doing this because I think it's the right thing to do, or it makes people impressed or something like that.
Well, that's related to what you said earlier, and the phrase you used, or the phrase I sort of heard you say, is that formation is like a filter. The practices of formation keep us locked into, Lord, what do you have for me? What do you want me to know? What do you want me to do? And then it helps us answer the question, Lord, what are the things I'm doing that you never asked me to do? But in order for us to operate in the filter, which is formation, we've got to have a hearing ear. Talk about the role of developing a hearing ear, Jamie, as it pertains to formation. Hearing requires what?
Practice. Practice. I like that. I like a lot of a lot of great writers talk about how, that God has one reality. He doesn't have multiple reality. Like his reality is one reality. And so in the reality that we have, life is about discipleship. It's about discipline. It's about processes. It's about like that, and struggling and learning and failing, and failing is learning and that kind of thing. And so everything's about practice and work, and work as unto the Lord, like with joy. And so listening to God, hearing from God is like, it's like communicating with anyone. It's a practice. You have to stay in it. You have to, I was in a group the other night, and they were asking like, what's some of the things you feel like the Lord wants you to do? And two of the people said, God is trying to teach me to listen to other people, to listen to what they're saying. Well, in order for them to get the idea that they should listen to what other people are saying means they were listening to God. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to listen to other people really unless you're listening to God. You're not going to. So it's just that practice. I practice constantly talking with the Lord, working with ideas and impressions. But I'm past the place in my life where was that God or not God? Like I'm past that. I know when the Lord is talking to me, and I know when it's me. I know the difference. They're different voices, and both can be super affirming and valid. But the voice of the Lord is just distinct. How do I know that? Because it's like a little toddler that comes into a room that doesn't know anything about their mother, doesn't know anything about where she's from, her biological history, nothing. But he knows that voice, and he can pick that voice out of a room full of people, even though he can't tell you the name of his mother. But he knows that voice. How? By listening to it constantly listening to the voice of God. And the voice of God produces in us love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. So that's it. That's my answer to everyone. Practice, listening journal, listening practices, testing out ideas that you associate with God, and being. I always ask people, does that make sense? Like, let's ask God a question, and then what's your sense? Does that make sense to you, what you just heard from the Lord? Because it could be hugely like, wow, that seems impossible, but it should make sense to you. Like if God's saying, like, raise your hand and pray and the sea will divide. Have you ever seen God do anything like that before? Yes, we have. Like, that makes sense, right? This is the kind of thing that God does, and in your identity and your experience, you develop this way of like, I know that voice, and I know this is how he works with me. I know it. This is how he moves in me, and we have this beautiful relationship that's become quite familiar and loving. And I know when he's pushing me, when his hand's on my back, saying, "Let's go, come on, let's go. Don't be afraid. What are you afraid of?" So that's my answer. That's discipline. That's practice. In the quiet before you get into the storm. Don't try it learn in the quiet.
Right. Well, I think you're such a good practitioner of that. I almost texted you actually New Year's Day, because we're only 5 days into the new year here at the time of recording, but I think it was New Year's Day or New Year's Eve. No, it was New Year's Day. You put a reel on Instagram. I'm like, hey, we got up, we got in the scriptures, we're seeking the Lord. What's important for us to know about that? The posture of seeking first, the posture of going to him first. And you could even speak to your personal journey of formation in the last few years compared to today. What's changed? What's new? What's fresh? What feels energizing? And how are you walking that out?
So like what I was saying about on New Year's Day is when I was asking God, what do you have for me to do in the new year? And he reminds me, it's not about doing, it's about being. It's about who do I want you to be in the new year. Like, I have to constantly be reminded about that in this world of doing. Constantly reminding. Being precedes doing, right? Contemplation precedes innovation. No one's ever innovated in the world that hasn't first worked through some form of contemplation on why didn't the first thing work, or why are we in a situation right now. So just that constant reminder is about who you are. It's about who God's made you to be, and developing that identity at higher and higher levels of creativity. That's what it is for me. And I've learned that that it's a constant invitation into places where I'm afraid. Like, I mean, I can just tell you that's where we're going.
Yeah.
And the fear is always, okay, you were going into a place where you're not really sure God can actually go or do it. Right? You know he can do these things, but this next thing he's inviting you into, you actually don't have any evidence that he could do this at this level, even though you've seen him do all these other things, you know. So sometimes people get on themselves like, why haven't I learned? Why haven't I learned? But it's a lot of it's like I learned a first grade level of something. Now we're in second grade, and it's different, and it's new, and it's scary. So I've learned, I think I'm quicker to move to what I'm afraid of, knowing almost that that's an indicator of where we're going to go. So when I have an idea and it scares me, I'm like, that's probably the right thing. That's probably just from my own experience of walking with the Lord. Yeah. Our pastor was talking on New Year's Day, and he was talking about how whenever you move towards the Lord, three things. The pushback is always three F words: false belief, fear, and formula. And that's always what is pushing back against you. False belief, wrong belief about God, yourself, and the world. Fear, and then the ease it is to fall back into some formula of how you don't do anything new. Just stay the same, do the same thing, go back to the old pattern. And the answer to false belief is always truth, and the answer to fear is always love, and the answer to formula is always freedom. So truth, love, and freedom are how we're supposed to be moving. The pushback is false belief, fear, and formula. So when the formula doesn't work, then you have to innovate, and that scares you. That scares us. This is a new territory, new ground. We can't do it in the same way that we did the last thing. So now we've got to go, we've got to go back and learn something new, and we got to trust God at a new level, and I don't know if I can do this, and I don't know if he can do this, and then you're back. But that's the journey, and to learn to live in that tension and not be confounded by it or defeated by it, but to embrace it as this is the journey. This is the journey that we're on.
So when I think about formula, because early on in the conversation we're talking about engaging the heart, when I think about when we fall back into formula, it disengages the heart and it diminishes the risk.
Absolutely.
Is that what our dependence upon formulaic approach to life is about? Disengaging the heart, disengaging our emotions, and then diminishing the risk?
Yes, absolutely. That's what it does. And so that's why it's easier to live by formula, for sure. I mean, yeah, it's so easy just to figure out some formula or try and figure out one and just stay in it. And so, yeah, part about what we're talking about in the screenplay that we wrote is, so the disruptors in your life are the beautiful things. Mm-hmm. Not the people that promise security and stability. That's the enemy. Because everything you and I are talking about is disruption, it's challenge, it's uncomfortable, but it's joyful and it's exhilarating, and it's, and like you said about your book, it's like when that birth happens, it's like, wow, that's so beautiful, and that came from me and it came from God, and it's like, wow. But the work and the times, when you're in the editing process and someone's just critiquing you constantly, very private things about you that you put out there, and they're critiquing it, and that's the challenging part of it all. But it's, that's the beautiful part. That keeps us alive and feeling and engaged, as you're saying. When people are like, I'm struggling with pornography or all these things, I'm like, it's because that's what disengaged people do. But when you're engaged, like, that's not worth it. It's just not worth it.
How do we hurdle the aversion? So one of the first things you said in the conversation was stop. That also means for many people surrender, and that seems so antithetical. Like, this is last thing I need to know. Rather, last thing I need to do when everything is going awry. I think about that in my own life. Like, when I've seemingly done all the right things and nothing's working, my temperament says keep pushing. But you were talking to us early on about stopping and surrender. How do we hurdle that aversion to stop and surrender and instead be willing to say, Lord, here I am going to stop. I am going to surrender. There's a hurdle there.
Right. It's funny because it's a deception. It's the idea that if I try harder, push harder, work harder, then I'm moving forward. When in actuality, you're dead. You're in a dead end. You're stopped. And then to stop and say, Lord, what do you want? Is to move forward. That is the moving forward. Is when you decide to wait on the Lord and stop and ask Him questions. It's moving the whole thing forward. That's how much we live in a lie. It's like more work, more production. It's like I was listening to this podcast on productivity, and they were talking about how, if you make 200 widgets in 8 hours, and you figure out how to make 200 in 4 hours, you could make 200 and then go home and spend more time with your family. But that's not what we do. We work longer making more, which is destructive. Instead of saying, wow, we've innovated into a place where we can do more in less time, so we have more time to focus on rest and but we don't do it. It's like, no, we've got to do more. We've got to work harder. We've got to produce more because then we can make more money and all that kind of thing. And it's destructive. We're not moving forward. It's actually, you're actually, going to kill yourself in it. So that's the lie. Stopping and waiting and contemplation and then the innovation process is moving the thing forward. When I was a cop and we would go into a domestic dispute, you don't go in and say, work harder at figuring out who's right and wrong. The first thing you do is shut the whole thing down. You just separate and shut the whole thing down. And that's the only way it goes forward, is when that happens. This is going to cause the permanent end of a relationship, of a life, of all of it. This jacked up, greater and greater passion and emotion, and we're going to try harder, and we're going to work harder, and we're going to beat inflation, and we're going to beat the recession. It's like, no, you're going to die. You're going to bring a permanent end to it. Instead of calm down, relax, quiet down, and in this way, we're going to move forward. We have a chance to move forward.
All of that reminds me of a talk you gave. Goodness, it's probably almost 5 years ago by now. You were talking about free radicals, and you were talking about. Do you remember that message?
Yeah.
Like to deal with the conflict on the outside, we have to first deal with the conflict within.
That's right.
I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, because we're going to have this conflict outside of us forever, but it doesn't have any say over how we live and how we move. It's the internal conflict, right, that will kill us. Yeah, and you're back to the formation and spiritual formation and keeping that inner peace.
I just thought of this, Jamie. I hadn't any intention to ask you this specifically, but if I look at the world geopolitically, financially, et cetera, everything that can be shaken is being shaken, so that the only unshakable thing is arising. That's Hebrews 12 in a nutshell.
That's right. Yes, absolutely.
How do we then, in our true identities, with the utility of formation, engage with shaking around us without shaking getting inside of us?
Yeah, this is, and we've actually talked about this before. It's Acts and Paul and the ship and the hurricane. It's like the whole thing is being shaken, and the sailors and everyone think they're going to die because of factually they are. Except there's this one guy in the middle of it that's completely calm because he knows that what's going to happen in his life is not affected by this turmoil. And so he's a creative minority in the middle of a world that is going berserk. And another writer calls it, be an island of sanity. Be an island of sanity in a world that's gone insane. Because when you're an island of sanity in an insane world, you shine like stars in the darkness. Like you shine more brightly in a world that's being shaken like crazy. And so in this world where, I'm actually going to speak on this next week in DC about the rise and fall of empires, because no empire's made it. No one's made it. Right? And so, one of the writers that writes on it is a guy, Sir John Glove, who was a British general, and he wrote a book called The Fate of Empires. And he charts the 7 phases of all empires, how they go up and they die. All of them started, he starts with the Assyrians. And he said every empire does exactly the same thing. Every empire does exactly the same thing. And when you read it, and they all last about 275 years before they fall apart. And when you're reading through the phases, you can just see our country right there. There it is. And it's like, what's going to stop that? And the answer is creative minorities, islands of sanity in the midst of this decline that are saying we're offering another way. What is the other way? Rest. Hebrews, rest. Waiting on the Lord. Discipline, the disciplines. And it's not falling apart. We're not powerless. We're not alone. This doesn't have to end this way. But the answer is not military power, political power, judicial power. That's not what it is. The answer is healing, right? One of my friends said the other day to me, Jesus never fixed anything. He heals things. He doesn't fix things. He heals things.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that's what we should be doing, is in what we're doing is bringing healing to, as all the way back to even what your book is about, is broken people break things. That's what they do. And they can call themselves Christians or whatever, but they're broken, and they don't really have the life within them. And so they can't bring life. They can only bring separation and destruction. So we have this great opportunity to be islands of sanity. And I want people to see, like, we're not going to die. We're not powerless. We're not alone. There is a way, like Paul standing in the middle of the ship. Just stay with me. Just stay with me. If you guys jump overboard, or if you don't stay with me, you will perish. But if you stay with me, even though you don't believe in my God, you'll still make it. And so they stay with him because he's the only island of sanity in that hurricane. So we got to be those islands of sanity. And
that's so good, Jamie. As always, I just love our time together. Is there anything else today that is just pertinent for us to lean into? Folks, I actually just want to say this real fast, folks. When Jamie's talking about these questions, these listening prayer type questions, Lord, what do you want me to know? What do you want me to do? Lord, is there anything hindering me from receiving from you? Your book, Living Fearless, really articulates how to step into this really well. So I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. Jamie, do you think it's worth mentioning silencing the room, why that's important, or should we just kind of point people to the book?
Well, no, I think that's a good way to end. I think that's a good way to end, because that's the part of the discipline of silence is silencing the enemy, right? It's not just sitting in a quiet room, because the enemy can come into a quiet room loud and clear. And so just the practice of shutting down the other voices that are in our head and in our world all the time. And they're so pervasive because we grew up believing they were true. And so to be separate from these other voices is really important. So it's just a prayer that we pray is, Lord, would you silence the voices in my mind and in my heart and in my spirit that are not from you? And just, silence the enemy. I do it when I pray with anyone. I do it, and any person or group that I pray with, and I do it in my own life. It's just the Lord rebuke you, Satan, in the name of Jesus. The Lord rebuke you, Satan, in the name of Jesus. Like, that's it. Not I rebuke you. The Lord rebuke you. And then that beautiful passage: submit to God and resist the devil, the enemy, and he will flee from you. Resist the liar, and he will flee from you. And people just try and resist the liar, but that's not the key. The key is submit to God. This is like the waiting. Waiting is not stopping. Waiting is moving forward. You're resisting the enemy. The way you resist the enemy is by submitting to God, not by resisting the enemy. You'll lose that battle. But so the Lord rebuke you, Satan. The Lord silence the voice of the enemy. When I'm doing this, I'm putting myself in submission to the one true voice that loves me and created me. And that is the resistance that never fails. And then the liar will flee from you. And then we can start to move forward. And Lord, what do you want me to know? And what do you want me to do? And walk me through all of my fear.
This whole process of formation, folks, is all about coming in to the knowledge of Christ within us, the hope of glory, being formed into his image, into his likeness.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I am going to put a link over at wintoday.tv. Get a copy or 50 of Jamie's book, Living Fearless, because everything Jamie just said, silencing the room, listening prayer, getting rid of false identities, all of that is in there. We've talked about that multiple times here with Jamie on the show, but head there now, wintoday.tv, get a copy of Jamie's book. But anything else here today, Jamie? Thank you.
Oh, I don't, man, it's like I need to go do all this stuff. It's a good reminder to me to stay in it. Yeah. Wrestling in it all the time. I know you are too. So it's great.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Blessings on 2023.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one.